You're too nice, Mom. Because of this, Katie is pampered and incapable of cleaning or cooking correctly. Get out of here, you worthless person. I had had enough of my mother-in-law's abuse, and I hesitantly brought up the subject of divorce. I was surprised at how easily she took it. I've been wondering how long that curse would stay in our house, she continued. Come on, David. It's not nice to call Katie a curse to her face, she replied. It turned out that they had been calling me a curse behind my back, the two of them. My hands shook a little. I knew I could always count on my parents' house. I anticipated this. My mother cryptically said, I'm ready, which caused me to tilt my head in uncertainty. As it turned out, my parents had been plotting away behind my back, unaware of me. My name is Katie. I'm 30 years old. 2 years ago, I tied the knot with my senior colleague, David. We've been talking lately about whether or not it's time to consider starting a family. There are more hospitals now that allow partners to be present during childbirth. Yes, and the fact that the pandemic is now over is a comfort. We registered our marriage instead of holding a wedding ceremony because we were getting married during a worldwide pandemic with flu-like symptoms. Okay, let's get started on the baby straight now. My mother is constantly asking when she will have grandchildren. Absolutely. Your mother is quite excited about it. She kept telling people not to get pregnant just yet because she was so afraid the unborn child might become ill. Quarantine limits were put in place to stop the virus from spreading, which made our lives very limited. Now that the limitations have been removed, I have a new issue to cope with. Katie, you are late. Where did you spend your time? Upon returning from my job, I discovered my mother-in-law in our apartment. 3 months ago, this unanticipated scenario began. I used to get a lot of calls from my mother-in-law. I could merely nod along while doing housework because it was over the phone and she couldn't see my face. I couldn't ignore her entirely since I could see how lonely self-isolation could be for her. But even those phone calls were a pain, and it is intolerable that she is coming to our house now that the outbreak has subsided. 3 or 4 times a week she drops by and lets herself in when we're gone. Oh, you're too late once again. Isn't it odd that a female employee works until 8 in the evening? I'm not sure if you were actually working tonight. Once more, my mother-in-law was present. David was with me as I worked. You can question him. You are making things up. You could work. I never said you should quit. But in other words, how can one be a housewife if they don't maintain the home? My mother-in-law gestures to the pot of curry I made in the morning when she opens the refrigerator without hesitation. Warming up some cold meals for your partner? I can't imagine doing it. Meals prepared freshly are the best. Did I not tell you that earlier? My mother-in-law offers me a ton of advice as a senior in life. But they're out of date and inaccurate, leaving me to question whether we've really moved on from the 1950s. I honestly remark, curry tastes better when it soaks up the flavors. With an air of exaggeration, my mother-in-law starts lecturing. That is not the main idea. To put it another way, a wife must provide her husband with a warm, freshly prepared dinner after he has been working all day. Do you not believe that a husband can't feel inspired to work if he doesn't have a satisfying supper and a happy wife? Correct? Do you not agree with me? Yes, that's correct, I answer. It would be wiser to just agree and nod. Yes, yes to everything, rather than adding more to the conversation. Meal kits with pre-cut veggies have been criticized with the illogical argument that chopping the vegetables yourself adds affection, but store-bought deli food is inappropriate. This is what I get, even if I try to cook ahead in the morning. She doesn't give a damn that I work too. She claims that these behaviors are typical of a wife. And despite giving me endless advice, my mother-in-law never pitches in to help with chores. She could lend a hand if the dust or the cups left in the sink really upset her, but she doesn't. Both our coffee usage and electricity bill have gone up recently. She's probably kicking back with the air conditioner, picking at everything, and just relaxing. I'm so tired, so I asked David to do me a favor. Could you please ask your mother to give back the extra key we provided her? We handed it to her in case something happened. David doesn't really understand it, even when I tell him how much I dislike his mother's continual presence. Do you dislike my mom? That isn't the case. Put it out of your mind. My mother is straightforward. Therefore, you could say that she's simple to get along with. She is not misleading. At first, David wasn't a mama's boy. His parents are not far away, but prior to our marriage, he hardly ever went to see them, and he never mentioned them. He just stupidly believes that since he loves her so much, I should be able to put up with her, and that we should get along together as women. Well, her feeling better is a positive thing. She kept to herself for a time even when everything began to move again. She may not look sensitive, but she is. Why not go shopping or out to dinner together if you don't want her at the house? I can't help but wish we could return to those days of self-imposed isolation. My mom rarely calls, but she did so one day. It seems that my mother-in-law paid a visit to my parents. My grandfather answered the door after they had left. My son is in the fields. Please enjoy some coffee while you wait for him. He should be back shortly. He invited her in. My mother-in-law appeared noticeably uneasy despite her certain surprise visit. My mom reported that my mother-in-law appeared uncomfortable and a little upset when my parents returned home after my grandpa had informed them. My mother-in-law had never met my parents before. The families didn't meet in person, and there was no wedding. The distance to my parents' place is just 40 minutes by car, but my extremely cautious mother-in-law had been hesitant to come because it's in a different state. Though anxious, it seemed that she was finally at ease enough to pay a visit. She left shortly after. My mother-in-law had called to tell me why my mother-in-law had come. She chose to stop by while she was in the neighborhood, presumably because we had written, "Please drop by if you're ever in the area," on our New Year's card. I never imagined that someone would pay me an unexpected visit after taking such a nice comment seriously. My questions regarding my mother-in-law's actions remain. Had my grandparents or parents done something that angered her? She appears to be quite the handful, to put it bluntly. "Are you having any trouble, Katie?" my mother asked on the phone. "Well, I'm getting by for now. I haven't yet reached my breaking point. I still aspire to be friendly with my mother-in-law." My mother-in-law visited our home the following Monday and, as typical, waited for me to get home. "You're running late today, I see. Why were you shirking off from your household responsibilities?" I almost said, "It's work," but I forced myself to stop. "Oh yes, you were employed," my mother-in-law admitted to me at last. I believed that she had finally come around to the idea that a woman should take care of all household chores. She had observed me preparing dinner, cleaning the house, and working late every night. I was relieved that my efforts had at last been noticed. I attempted to grin back at her, but soon I sensed something wasn't quite right. Poor people are always busy, and Katie, you're destined to work for the rest of your life. I could understand her traditional ideas about what a wife should do, but it was strange that all of a sudden she criticized me. She snorted, and I stood there, confused. "Yesterday, I saw your parents," she said. "Your parents' house is falling apart," which shocked me. The appearance of the place is frightening. Yes, my parents' house is old. It's a traditional house, but it's well maintained despite its age. I was annoyed that she was unable to distinguish the difference. My mother-in-law has always disapproved of my employment since she felt it disregarded the family. Her continuous advice to help David and also get pregnant quickly was hard enough. But now she was making fun of my parents as well. My mother-in-law had, incidentally, arrived empty-handed, but had the guts to say, "Now that I've met your folks, I can see why you labor nonstop. Poor farmers are forced to put in a lot of overtime." Even if you might work in an office, the process is still the same. It's built into your DNA or something to function like a dog," she uttered loudly as she opened her arms widely, resembling a scientist announcing a groundbreaking discovery. Her reasoning made no sense to me at all. She has been criticizing me more harshly ever since that day. "Oh no, the TV is covered in dust. Are you simply foolish or blind? David is poor. He must live in such a dusty place." Since I had just finished mopping this morning and there was no dust, I reasoned that perhaps her vision was the issue. "Oh no, look how carelessly the clothes are folded. At your parents' place, is this how you go about things? David is poor, having to put up with wrinkled clothes." Before saying this, she gave the folded clothing a small kick. It would seem disorganized, of course. She would frown at me as soon as I tried to say anything, and then she would start lecturing me about all the things I was doing incorrectly. I was forced to listen to her nagging while sitting on the floor. About 15 minutes would pass if I said nothing in response. I therefore gradually learned to keep quiet. Whenever David wasn't home, these lectures would take place. She pretended to be a kind, loving mother in front of him. I tried to confront David about her actions at first, but I eventually gave up. Mom claims that she never made those remarks. She genuinely believes that you are difficult to get along with because of your strong personality. Perhaps you need to quit disobeying her instructions. Rather than demeaning her, could you concentrate on doing the cleaning correctly? Most likely all you do is oppose her. David thought I was just making fun of his mother, even if it was real. It would get old to him to hear, so there would be calm at home as long as I put up with it. I just needed to pay attention to my mother-in-law's teachings in silence. It was easy. However, something inside of me gave out one day. "This stew tastes terrible. Make a new one." My mother-in-law abruptly inserted her spoon into the stew I was preparing. She tasted it, and without hesitation, threw the entire pot into the sink. She was picking a carrot out of the sink with a casual behavior, and I thought her smile was twisted. "Before discarding, be sure to drain the liquid. We wish to avoid smelling trash. I know I'm a really nice mother-in-law to have assisted you." My real mother gave that carrot to me. She occasionally sends me veggies from her garden. She used to deliver them personally, but now she mails them to my mother-in-law out of consideration. My parents' grown onions, potatoes, and carrots were now strewn all over the sink. These were not trash. These were valuable vegetables. My breathing became labored. This was more than I could handle. That's when I discovered how unusual my circumstances were. I discussed divorce timidly that night, and to my surprise, David and my mother-in-law both agreed right away. "Ah, a divorce? Yes, please proceed." "David, I was wondering how long that curse would last." "Don't be so harsh calling Katie a curse to her face." It seems that they had been referring to me as a jinx. "You're too kind, Mom. Katie became spoilt as a result, making it impossible for her to clean or cook properly. Leave right away, you worthless person." "All right." There was a small tremble in my hands. I went to my bedroom and made a call to my mom to get me. There was nowhere else I could go but my parents' house. I expected this. Acknowledging the circumstances, my mother promised to arrive immediately. I didn't know my parents had a plan, so I tilted my head in confusion at her odd words. "I'm ready." I finished packing and bided my time until she got here. They appear to have arrived really quickly. It took my parents roughly 30 minutes to get to our place. Excuse for the delayed call. My mother-in-law made nasty remarks. They suddenly decided to get a divorce, and I know farmers have to get up early. My mother smiled in response. "It is not a concern. We are at this place to pick up our beloved daughter. Our families don't seem to get along. We appreciate you watching our daughter for this brief period." From her suitcase, my mother produced a divorce document, which she gave to David. So, when she said she was ready, she meant this. She understood from our occasional phone conversations that my marriage was about to end. Though briefly taken aback, David completed it without hesitation. He flashed the divorce papers in front of me and said, "Now we're strangers." I looked away when my mom took it from him. "Leave the filing to me." "Yes, please go on," I reassuredly said. "We're glad we're getting divorced before starting a family. We do not wish to have children of low blood." Perhaps because of my parents' modesty, David and my mother-in-law displayed arrogant behavior. I clenched my fists, swallowing my frustration. Having finalized the divorce, I no longer give a damn about them. Even though my parents, who came to pick me up, must be furious, they're acting calmly. I didn't want to allow my emotions to get the better of me and start a pointless argument. Even with the strain, we had a fairly friendly farewell. "I'll miss those cheap meals loaded with veggies, Katie." They even walked us to the apartment building's entrance, saying, "Poor David, let's have steak at a restaurant tomorrow." Their goodbye statements were rather remarkable, even though their behaviors appeared kind. My father remarked, "Well then, excuse us," as my mother-in-law took a quick look around. "Where did you park that wonderful pickup truck?" It appears they intended to embarrass us right up until the very end. They trailed behind us, seeing our pitiful departure in a filthy pickup vehicle. Their smug smiles were contorted. When I realized I had been living with such unattractive people, I was disgusted. My parents continued to grin gently, even despite the obvious ridicule. I felt ashamed, but I didn't want to pick an argument. I looked down and bit my lip. My mother then grasped my hand. She smiled brightly at me, as though to reassure me that everything would be okay. I glanced at my father in curiosity, and he nodded kindly as well. My father said, "Oh, the car should be here any minute," but the roar of an engine overpowered him. David and my mother-in-law turned to face the sound out of instinct. A sports automobile is speeding in our direction, slicing through the night's darkness. Its body has a brilliant sheen. It came to a stop directly in front of us. Taken aback by its enormous presence and luxury, my mother-in-law recoiled a little. "Whoa, that's amazing!" She cried, "I never imagined I'd see such a wonderful car up close." David, though, found himself captivated by the vehicle. My father stopped him as he reached out to touch it. David appeared irritated at being halted. The driver's door opened just then. Well, well, here I am. My grandfather got out of the driver's seat. From the sleek sports car stepped my grandfather, who had a somewhat rustic appearance. David was left speechless as he stood there, the experience surpassing his expectations. "I appreciate you looking after my granddaughter. To pick up my family, I've come here." My parents got into the car after placing my bags in the rear seat. Grinning, my grandfather let me in through the passenger door. That's what it is, I recognized after a while. Goodbye, farewell. They chose to show up in a sports car to make a statement because they always thought less of my family and me. After all, we were impoverished farmers. Its sheer luxury intimidated even my mother-in-law, who had little interest in cars, and David, who recognized its value. My grandfather and parents were taking an indirect poke at one other. My grandfather pressed the gas pedal. David and my mother-in-law stood there looking silly, and then they were soon out of sight. I had always felt that I couldn't ask my parents for assistance because I got married and became independent. However, my family has always supported me. I thanked Mom, Dad, and Grandpa once we had finally settled down. "Did you notice how astonished they looked?" I exclaimed. It felt so good. My parents gave me a knowing smirk. Dad answered, "Yes, but this is just the beginning." My feelings had gone numb from being controlled by my mother-in-law. However, my parents were still furious from my side. "Those two will not remain silent," my mother said. "They'll return to make trouble. No doubt about it." The following day, My mother-in-law and David arrived at our place, just as she had declared. They continuously rang the intercom and pounded on the door. Reluctantly, I spoke to them, thinking they might smash the door if I didn't respond. I said, "Can I help you?" They leaped and spun around, glancing at every inch of me. They smirked, seeing that I was the same as always. "See, I told you yesterday was just a bluff," David replied. "Yes, that vehicle was most likely rented. It must have been quite expensive to hire it for a short while. What a waste of cash. Regardless, a pickup truck and an abandoned house are more appropriate for farmers." My mother-in-law continued, obviously resentful of last night. They had traveled this far just to make me feel worse. My parents had planned for this day and were excited about it. They didn't want my mother-in-law and David to back down at the sight of a single sports car, ruining their well-laid plans. I vowed never to look at David's face again the moment I left our flat. But now my pulse raced to see them arrive as planned. "Yes, this house is really rather old. We didn't mind, but hearing you refer to it as a dump hurt a little," I remarked, dropping my brows and fumbling with my fingers to give the impression that I was insecure. When she saw my humility, my mother-in-law became even more arrogant. "I apologize. I simply said the truth. I have no emotional understanding of farming. Why live in such a run-down place when the property and house are so large? I would much rather live in a brand-new, modest home." My mother-in-law said sarcastically, "Poor farmers have a different sense of value from the rest of the world." I gave a tiny nod, taking in what she had said. "Yes, I grew up in this house, so no, I didn't find it unusual. However, now that you bring it up, I do find the cold drafts and squeaky stairs bothersome. Since it's breezy in the summer, we don't use the air conditioning, but because my parents and grandfather are elderly, I worry." My mother-in-law appeared satisfied when I was honest. "You're correct. Older people can die in an old residence. The true summer heat is on the way. Living without air conditioning is unimaginable these days. I'm hoping they reach fall." "Yes, but there's also the possibility of a heart attack in the bathtub during the winter." With a theatrical gesture and a tight grip on her chest, she uttered, "Poor farmers, always on the brink of death." David rolled her eyes dramatically and laughed. I thanked them for their care, ignoring their laughs. "But you don't need to worry anymore." I turned around as I was speaking and gestured across the tiny street with my right hand. "That's our new home." David's mother and he stood looking at the new, contemporary home. In the fairly rural area of conventional residences, the enormous white house appeared out of place. A large lawn dotted with in-season flowers fluttered in the wind. "A residence? Yes. Mansion sums it up well in one word," I replied. At that moment, the mansion's front door opened, revealing my parents. "What? How?" My mother-in-law tightly clutched her shirt as she gasped. She didn't simply seem to be acting. She actually appeared to be in pain. I said again, "I told you this is our new home." "What?" As my parents, who were casually dressed, smiled and waved at us, David murmured uneasily. Walking like zombies, my mother-in-law and David trailed behind me as I crossed the street to get to them. "Is this a new episode? Have you rented a place from someone else?" With anxiety, David inquired. My parents chuckled even wider. "Hold. This," my mother said, "is our new house." My mother timidly clarified, saying, "Katie informed us that you were unhappy in our previous residence. We are sorry for that." Even though she was trying to seem serious, there was a smirk teasing her apology. While leaving our longtime home was difficult, our new home is incredibly cozy. The robot cleaner is quite effective, and there are no stairs to trip over. The house is comfortable all year round thanks to our central air conditioning.